Now, Molly Bang says that the center of the page is the most effective center of attention. It's the point of greatest attraction. So another way to put this is it's the strongest point of your image. The eye will naturally gravitate towards the center from wherever it is. So how do you utilize that without just putting everything right in the center? Because if this is the strongest point, whatever comes here is going to feel very powerful, right? It's going to attract the eye. It has the strength to pull you in. Well, there are a bunch of different ways, and in fact, a number of them are recorded inside of your crop tool. If we click the crop tool and just click on it, we end up with this grid. Now, this grid is controlled by this icon up here, and this has the rule of thirds, just a standard grid that's based off of your ruler, if I remember correctly. You have a diagonal, which has, again, the center. So what's going on there? We've got some more questions. We have triangle. That one's a fun one. We've got the golden ratio. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And the golden spiral. This is also pretty important, so we'll talk about all those coming up. But let's start with the rule of thirds. So if the center of the page is the most important part, maybe what you want to do rather than sit right in it is to dance around it. Now, the rule of thirds is basically this. Cut your page up into thirds, and you'll have 3 smaller areas, right? But those lines where you did the cuts will have overlaps. Those places will be the second most important areas to the center itself. So in other words, if I were to, let's not crop, I'm going to do a guide, and I've gone ahead and gone to Edit, Preferences, and we should have Guides, Grids, and Slices. And I've set this from the normal cyan to a medium blue so we can see it a little bit better. And I went ahead and created a new guide under View, and then New Guide Layout. And on our new guide layout, I've created a rule of thirds. All that is 3 columns, 3 rows with no gutter, and that will automatically place it exactly in the rule of thirds. So we've got these guides here. All right, so now we can see this without our crop tool. That's the whole point of all of that. Now, if we were to put this dot, say here, or if we were to have multiple dots placed around, if we put them on these corners, and I'm going to press Control H to hide the guide, they'll feel of equal importance. But if we were to place something a little closer to the center, it will start to feel a little more important. And it will feel more important even if you were to do something like, let me make this a smart object so that we can adjust the size. Here we go. And not worry about damaging it. Now it's smaller, right? So it should feel less important. Smaller objects tend to, if we just put these next to each other. But if you put it towards the center of the page, it starts to feel stronger somehow. In other words, you're pulled towards it more easily. Even if you surround it, once again, as soon as we're in the center, it's going to feel more valuable, more important, stronger. And that's true for anything that we start pulling in there. As we push stuff away, we can still make it feel balanced. Let's do this. With some radial symmetry. Well, this isn't truly radial symmetry, but reflective symmetry, we'll say. We have something in the bottom left and the bottom right of same size and value and color. It's top left, top bottom right, same deal. We've got that all going around. We can create this sense of balance without using the center. We're placing things around it instead. So Control H again. I got pretty close. So if you move things the same distance apart, and I've accidentally duplicated this, which happens sometimes, I'll just throw away the duplicate. Control H. Just by using that grid, we're able to maintain a balance here. We may not have a lot of motion to this, but we do have a balance. If we place a 5th item more in the center, now we should have some semblance of motion going on. And most likely people will look this direction simply because top right, bottom left, sorry, top left, bottom right, got my sides confused there for a moment. And we're just taking advantage. Notice this isn't in the dead center. In fact, do your best to avoid going flat out in the center of the image. Consider this the dead zone. This is somewhere that you do not want to place something. Just leave it empty as you go, and you'll probably have a better time. Now, these are not laws handed down from the heavens. If you really want to put something in the middle, or you just like how something that's in the middle looks, leave it there. That's fine. But if you build everything around the very center of your image, it's probably going to be less interesting. The rule of thirds is one way to utilize the center space without, in fact, having something on the center space. You can bounce around it instead. Things that you place on these lines around and about will feel utilized. You don't have to place it directly on there. It'll still feel as though you're utilizing the center space if you place things near it, just avoiding that crosshatch. So kind of watch out for that. But again, the rule of thirds isn't the only way to handle this. Let me tuck all of these away in a group here. I only really need one dot for a moment. We can always make more. We'll hide those. And let me clear out these guides. And again, the way you want to do that is just view clear guides, and the guides are gone. So we had something called the golden ratio. And if we go back to our crop tool, and I did not grab our crop tool, I grabbed the frame tool by accident. If we go back to the crop tool, we can set it over to the golden ratio. Now, the golden ratio, this is different. Something else is going on here. It's doing its best to cut this up into rectangles. See this rectangle here and this rectangle here and the size between them that follows something called the golden ratio. So let's talk about that for just a moment. Okay, I've gone ahead and made my own little golden ratio. So that we can work on this a little bit. And this should be pretty close to what's in the crop tools golden ratio. It's flat on. In fact, here's something interesting about the golden spiral. Now this is interesting, isn't it? We'll talk about why it's hitting certain points as well as this golden ratio. So I said that the golden ratio is interesting. If you were to express the Fibonacci sequence, you start to get a number that's similar to the golden ratio in the way that if you divide one set from another. So what's all that mean? What's the Fibonacci sequence? What's the golden ratio? What's this have to do with the golden spiral? Well, it's basically this. In nature, things tend to grow according to the Fibonacci sequence. So in other words, you start out with, say, a seed, and that seed doesn't have much going on it, but then eventually it grows into some bud or something, right? So you had nothing, then you have one thing. Well, it's going to grow. It tends to grow a little bit, right? So you went from 0 to 1. Now you can express it a little more interestingly. You have the next one, right? But then the next growth pattern tends to follow something like this, 2. And then the next one tends to follow a 3, 5, 8. And it could go on forever, 13, etc., etc. Hopefully I didn't mess up any of my simple arithmetic. That would be very embarrassing. So this tends to happen in nature quite often, even in the way that people have growth patterns, that sort of thing. I'm not a biologist, so I might be getting some of this wrong, but you have 1, 1, which is then 2, and then you have the 3, and then you would have something like 5 going in. What it is it's the last 2 units added together to make the next one. So 0 and 1 is 1, 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 3 and 5 is 8, and then we got 13. And so that's kind of the growth pattern. That's about what it's doing. Now, do this long enough, you start getting some very, very big numbers going in, and then something interesting happens if you start dividing those numbers way down the chain by each other. So, for example, if we were to bring open our favorite calculator again, ta-da, and we had 13 and 8, we end up with a number that's about 1.6 something. Well, let's do this again. Sorry about all the math. This will just be a moment more. It will make sense in a moment too. If we took 5 and divided by 3, we still have this 1.6. Now, we've got some extra numbers, and the smaller the number, the rougher it will be. But this number becomes important, too. This number becomes the golden ratio. If we go far enough down the Fibonacci sequence and take some massive number divided by the other, we'll be pretty close to the golden ratio. Hold on for just a second. Let me say this. So in nature, we have all of these Fibonacci sequences occurring. And in fact, I can bring some up. Here we go. So this sunflower, the pattern of these sunflower seeds are following the Fibonacci sequence in their growth pattern. Again, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3 and 2 is 5, 5 and 3 is 8, 8 and 5 is 13, 13 and 8 is, what do we have, 21, something along those lines. Keeps going along. That's the pattern of these as they grow out. Here's a succulent that's also following the Fibonacci sequence. What becomes more interesting is you end up with things like seashells and their growth pattern, how the next striation, how far apart these will be. It's again the Fibonacci sequence. Most famously, well, we've got cauliflower, which is very, very popular for people demonstrating this Fibonacci sequence. But most famously, we do in fact have the nautilus shell, and this shell becomes interesting again. The growth pattern again is following the Fibonacci sequence as it grows out. The size of this is the previous few sizes, except you'll notice that it's a bit different here. When you get to the end, it becomes quite massive comparatively. It's the growth pattern, but it's not adhering exactly, but it's doing something else. It's creating a spiral. Now, this spiral may look a little familiar. So we said that as we divide things, we end up with the golden ratio, right? So let's bring up the golden ratio real quick. Here's the golden ratio. It's this division. This division is essentially a plus b divided by a will equal a over b is how they're talking about that. I believe I said that right. I may have gotten that slightly wrong. But if you get used to just drawing and cutting this line up, it's actually very, very pleasing. And the ratio, again, if you divide this, is about 1.6. So this is about 1 and 2/3 the size of this. So if we took B and plopped it on down, it would take up 1 and 2/3. And let me actually show you that real quick. We'll just grab this image and paste it down in Photoshop. Voila. Now I will toss this in multiply mode for just a moment. My claim is that we should have, and sure enough, that is about 1 and 2/3. So that's the size of the first one. And the next one will be, so think of it as the growth. Instead of making it smaller, make it bigger. Draw a shape, and then you'll have 1 and 2/3 larger for the next one. Now that's the golden ratio, more or less, that we were getting by this rule of growth and then dividing it out to figure out what's going on. So it's something that we see in nature all the time. So it should be something we're pretty used to. Now let's pop back to that, to this. If you keep cutting things up, so we can go one way. If we grow it, we draw like the small box and we add 1 and 2/3 worth, we get the next one up. We could go the other way. We could cut it. We could cut it at the 1.6 mark, and then we could cut it at the 1.6 mark and the 1.6 mark and the 1.6 mark, and we end up with a grid like this. We just keep slicing these down, and sure enough, this is once again the Fibonacci number. We get 1, 1, 2, and then all that together to make 3, all that together to make 5, all that together we get 8. All that together, I mean, is 5 and 3. So the previous step to make 8, previous 2 steps to make 13, previous 2 steps to make 21. A little easier to visualize, right? Oh, look. If we start drawing around it, where we draw an arc from one corner to another, one corner to another, one corner to another, we end up with this spiral. This spiral is the approximation of the golden spiral. So let's test that real quick. I'm just going to toss this in normal mode. We will grab our crop tool again. We will set it to the golden spiral, and we'll click on it. Look how beautifully it fits right across this line. So if we cut this at the 1.6 mark, And I will just go ahead and take a brush. And brush, I say. A brush, if I could, please. Thank you. If we... I use the problems there. If we cut this, I want to say this is about the 1.6 mark. I should do that on another one. So if we divide it up there, I think that's about right. This size should be about 1 2/3 of this. This would be the 1/3 mark, 2/3 mark. So we've got about that, and from there to there, yeah, that feels about right. So I'm just eyeballing it. Let's see if this works out. Grab our crop tool again, keep missing, set it to the golden spiral, click. Oh, it's pretty close. So at each one of these marks, as we go in, we will essentially tap against it with this golden spiral. That's what that's saying. That's what this curve that's being applied by the crop tool is saying. It's producing it, again, according to the golden ratio, which is just building it up here, built up here in this grid. And it's trying to draw that spiral in it. So herein lies some important questions. Why does that matter? Well, because again, the Fibonacci sequence is something that we see throughout our lives. We'll see it everywhere in nature. So it's something that we're used to, something that we understand, something that even we grow to, down to our bones. This is something intuitive to people who have been alive and wandering around in the world for a while. So by taking that Fibonacci sequence, we can grow certain shapes out of it that we will have also seen frequently. So it's something we're used to, something that we feel as though will be natural. And so we will know what to do with it. It will feel in balance. So a shape like this should start to feel balanced, even though there's no reason for it to be. At least no reason we actively notice it to be. It is in fact just context. It's something that we've built up over time. Yikes. So what does all that mean to us? Well, glad you asked. Let's come back over here. So we have this grid, but what if we produce a spiral across this so that we at least try to follow the golden spiral here. Let me build one of those. Okay. Behold, we've got more or less a golden spiral here. Whew. Let's go ahead and make a couple of red dots. Now these dots should supposedly be more or less identical, but I'm going to do something a little different with one of them. I'm going to put it right in the point of the golden ratio. I should probably lock this so that I don't accidentally move it around. Boop. And probably lock that one as well. Boop. There we go. Okay. So these two will be similarly placed, right? But in this one, I'll put at this mark, which is within essentially a third of a third. I should still have, maybe not, I've lost my grid. I should still, right, yeah. I cleared my grid, my apologies. So we should have these placed. Let's take a look at them. Which one to you looks more attractive? To me, it's this one. And the reason for that is twofold. It's a little higher, and I read left to right, so I've already gone, top to bottom, left to right. So I'm ending over here, but also it's ending up at an interesting point. It's ending up right on the golden ratio point. Now, that helps me a bit, but here's another question. How does it help you as the student? Well, if you're replacing something for the first time, let's go ahead and make a new one of these. And we'll just rotate this entire image 90 degrees counterclockwise. If you were drawing something in, maybe have an item that you know will be interesting right around here. And then if you can, follow something around and try to fit it within this golden ratio, this golden spiral. Now, how will you do this? I just go to Google and grab a golden spiral and throw it in multiply mode. Turn it to black and white, throw it to multiply mode, and voila, you've got a little golden spiral, and you can try to place things in it. Now you can move things around, and show you how to do that with something like the Liquify tool, for example, or the Smudge tool, just cutting something up and moving it around. But by placing it along the golden spiral, you'll be able to have items of attraction that feel somewhat balanced, even though they, on the side of it, don't really have any particular reason to be in balance. But we'll know that the reason is the golden spiral makes us feel like things are important and together. So even if we have weird abstract shapes and patterns that don't make much sense, they could still feel good, right? There's still a chance of them fitting together well. And that's all that the golden ratio and golden spiral mean. It's a way to take advantage of a layout without taking advantage or relying on that center space altogether. So you also have some others, and I'll just, we're running high on time here. I just feel that this is important for layout purposes. If we grab our other crop tool options, we could start to realize that if we use something like, for example, the diagonal, we could do the same kind of thing. If we have elements placed around the edges or along lines, we can start doing a nice little layout. What if we put a lot of interesting elements over here and over here? Well, voila, we start to get something that feels balanced. It's going to feel right. And that's really what we're getting to with all of this. How do you make it feel correct, especially when you're working in abstracts, blotches and spots and things? Well, that's one way to do it. All right, so that's some good layout techniques. Basically, take a look at your crop tool. See where the lines are that you have in the crop tool, and try to have things follow along those lines instead of right in the center of things. That way you can utilize it a little bit. Hopefully this helps you. I know that we delved into math for a little bit, but I feel as though it's important. These things come from nature. We're used to them. So if we touch on it a little bit in our own design, it will feel intuitive, it will feel good, and it will feel balanced. We'll have a way of bringing the eye to specific points because that's where our eye is going to go through years and years of training. All right, so that's some things about layout. Let's go over a few other principles of design. I will see you in the next video.